Discipline is not willpower, it's identity. And what you're about to learn is how the ancient Greeks, samurai warriors, and modern neuroscience all discovered the same system for becoming someone unstoppable. The version of discipline that gets sold to you in self-help books and motivational videos is a watered-down, surface-level imitation of what the word actually means. Most people treat discipline as willpower, as the ability to force yourself through pain until you reach some finish line, and that definition is exactly why most people fail at it. The ancient Greeks had a different word entirely. They called it enkrateia, which translates to power over oneself. Aristotle defined enkrateia as the opposite of acrasia, weakness of will. And this distinction between that phrase and the modern concept of discipline is the difference between someone who builds an empire and someone who burns out before breakfast. What you are about to learn is a system for reconstructing the way your mind operates through neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, a framework built from ancient, strategic philosophy and confirmed by modern psychology that turns discipline from a daily battle into something that runs on autopilot. And once that system clicks into place, the person staring back at you in the mirror 3 months from now will be unrecognizable. Here is the first thing you need to understand, and it will change the way you approach every goal you set for the rest of your life. Discipline is not about effort, it is about identity. The reason most people fail at maintaining discipline is that they treat it as an action, something they do, when it is actually something they become. A study published in the British Journal of Health Psychology in 2012 by researchers Phillippa Lally, Cornelia van Jaarsveld, Henry Potts, and Jane Wardle at University College London tracked 96 participants over 12 weeks and found that it took an average of 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic, but the range was enormous, anywhere from 18 to 254 days depending on the person and the behavior. What separated the fast adopters from the slow ones was not willpower, not motivation, and not intelligence. It was how deeply the person tied the new behavior to their sense of self. The participants who saw themselves as the type of person who exercises rather than someone who is trying to exercise formed the habit faster and maintained it longer. This connects directly to Angela Duckworth's research on grit, the combination of passion and perseverance that predicts long-term success better than talent alone. Miyamoto Musashi understood this principle 400 years before any psychologist put it under a microscope. Musashi was a Japanese samurai born in 1584 who fought over 60 duels across his lifetime and never lost a single one. That record alone makes him one of the most disciplined human beings who ever lived. But the record is not the point. The point is how he achieved it through the principles of Bushido, the way of the warrior. A week before his death in 1645, Musashi wrote a short document called the Dokkodo, which translates to the way of walking alone. It contains 21 precepts for living, and every single one of them is a statement of identity, not a to-do list. He wrote, "Accept everything just the way it is." He wrote, "Do not pursue the taste of good food." He wrote, "Never be jealous. These are not goals. They are declarations of who he chose to be." And the discipline that produced 60 consecutive victories came not from gritting his teeth through pain, but from eliminating any distance between his actions and his identity. This is the shift most people never make. They set an alarm for 5 in the morning and tell themselves they are going to wake up early. Then the alarm rings and their body screams at them to stay in bed, and they enter a negotiation with themselves that they almost always lose. The person who has made the identity shift does not negotiate. The alarm rings and they get up, not because they want to, not because they feel motivated, but because sleeping in would contradict who they are. There is no internal debate, because the decision was made months ago when they stopped saying "I want to be disciplined" and started saying "I am disciplined." That single shift in language rewires the neural pathways your brain uses to process decisions through neuroplasticity, and it does so because your brain is constantly working to maintain consistency with your self-image. Cognitive dissonance research, going back to Leon Festinger in 1957, has demonstrated this repeatedly. When your behavior contradicts your identity, your brain experiences genuine psychological discomfort, and it will work to resolve that discomfort either by changing the behavior or changing the identity. Most people change the behavior. The person who locks in their identity first forces the brain to adjust the behavior instead. Now let us talk about why this matters more right now than at any other point in human history. You are living inside a machine that was engineered to destroy your discipline. That is not a metaphor. Every notification on your phone, every autoplay video, every algorithmically curated feed was designed by teams of engineers and behavioral psychologists whose explicit goal was to capture and hold your attention for as long as possible. Former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris described this system in testimony before the United States Senate Commerce Committee in 2019, explaining that the average smartphone user receives between 65 and 80 interruptions per day, and each interruption derails focus for an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds, according to research by Gloria Mark at the University of California. That means if you check your phone 10 times during a focused work session, you have not lost 10 minutes. You have lost nearly 4 hours of deep cognitive processing. This is not an accident. This is the business model. Your attention is the product being sold, and the companies selling it have invested billions of dollars into making sure you cannot look away. The dopamine feedback loop that fires every time you see a new notification is the same loop that activates during gambling, and it was installed in your pocket on purpose. Understanding this is not about becoming paranoid or afraid. It is about seeing clearly what you are up against and then choosing from a position of calm awareness to operate differently. The person who understands the game does not have to fear the game. They simply refuse to play by its rules. This brings us to a critical piece of modern neuroscience that directly contradicts the most popular model of discipline from the last 25 years. Roy Baumeister and his research team at Florida State University published a landmark study in 1,998 Inches, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, proposing that self-control operates like a muscle that can be fatigued. They called this ego depletion, and the idea spread everywhere. It became the backbone of an entire industry, telling people they have limited willpower and should ration it carefully. But in 2010, researchers Veronica Jobe, Carol Dweck, and Gregory Walton at Stanford University published a study in Psychological Science that challenged the entire framework. They found that people who believed their willpower was limited experienced ego depletion, while people who believed their willpower was unlimited did not. The depletion was not physiological, it was psychological. It was a belief. A large-scale replication attempt, published in Perspectives on Psychological Science in 2016, involving over 20 laboratories and 2,000 participants, failed to find a significant ego depletion effect using Baumeister's original methods. The debate continues in academic circles, but the strategic implication is clear. If you believe you are someone who runs out of willpower, your brain will manufacture that experience for you. If you believe you are someone whose reserves are deep, your brain will deliver that reality instead. This is where Cato the Younger becomes the most relevant historical figure you have never been taught about. Cato was born in 95 BC into one of Rome's most powerful families. He could have lived in extraordinary luxury. He inherited a massive fortune and had direct access to the inner circles of Roman political power. Instead, he chose a life that made his contemporaries stare in disbelief. Cato walked through the streets of Rome barefoot in freezing rain. He ate the simplest food available when he could have feasted every night. He wore plain, rough clothing when silk and purple dye were the symbols of status. He slept on the ground when beds were available, and he marched alongside his soldiers on foot when every other Roman commander rode a horse. He did this not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he understood something about discipline that most people still miss. Every comfortable choice you make teaches your brain that comfort is the priority, and every uncomfortable choice you make teaches your brain that your standards are the priority. Seneca, one of the most influential Stoic philosophers in Roman history, wrote about Cato with a respect he showed almost no one else. In his letters, Seneca advised that when choosing a role model, one should choose a Cato, and only if Cato seems too severe, choose a gentler spirit. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who practiced Stoicism while ruling the known world, wrote in his Meditations that the impediment to action advances action, a principle Cato embodied perfectly. When Cato visited the public baths one day and someone shoved and struck him, he did not retaliate. He did not even acknowledge the aggression. Once the altercation was broken up and someone tried to apologize on the attacker's behalf, Cato's response was simple and devastating. He said he did not even remember being hit. That is not suppression. That is a man whose identity is so firmly constructed that an insult cannot find a place to land. His sense of self was not built on what others thought of him or how they treated him. It was built on his own standards, and those standards were maintained daily through the specific, deliberate practice of choosing discipline over comfort in every small moment. This principle echoes Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. Cato's story reaches its peak in the final weeks of his life, when Julius Caesar won the civil war and offered to pardon everyone who had fought against him. Cato was the only man in Rome who refused. On the night before his death in 46 BC, he dined calmly with friends, spent several hours reading Plato's Phaedo, a dialogue about the immortality of the soul, and then made his decision. He chose to end his own life rather than live a single day under what he considered to be a tyrant's authority. That final act became a symbol that echoed through the next 2,000 years of Western history. George Washington had a play about Cato performed for his troops at Valley Forge during the darkest period of the American Revolution. The founding fathers quoted Cato's story in their letters and speeches. His example proved that discipline carried to its logical conclusion becomes a force that reshapes the world around you, even long after you are gone. Now, take everything you have learned so far and apply it to the 3 domains where discipline actually operates: your body, your mind, and your daily systems. These 3 domains are not separate. They feed each other in a loop, and strengthening one automatically strengthens the others. The body is where discipline becomes visible. There is a reason that every serious philosophical tradition, from Stoicism to the samurai code of Bushido, includes physical training as a non-negotiable component. Musashi trained with his sword from sunrise until dark, every single day, for decades. He did not train because he had a competition coming up. He trained because the act of training was itself the practice of discipline, and that practice carried over into everything he did. In his book of 5 Rings, written in 1643, he described his principle that when you become competent in one discipline, the skill carries over into all others. He wrote that if you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything. Modern psychology confirms exactly this. The Baumeister team's earlier work, before the ego depletion controversy, found that people who practice small acts of physical discipline in one area of life showed measurably improved self-control in completely unrelated areas. Participants who spent 2 weeks deliberately improving their posture performed better on cognitive tasks that required patience and focus. The body teaches the mind what standards look like. David Goggins understood this at an extreme level. Goggins is a former Navy SEAL who completed training, one of the world's most demanding military programs, and became one of the world's top endurance athletes who completely rebuilt his identity through physical discipline. He went from being an overweight, directionless young man to completing some of the most punishing physical challenges on the planet, including the Badwater 135, a race that covers 135 miles through Death Valley, in temperatures that reach 130 degrees Fahrenheit. What makes Goggins relevant here is not the extremity of what he did, but the principle behind it. He described what he calls the 40% rule. When your mind tells you that you are finished, that you cannot take another step, you have only used about 40% of your actual capacity. The remaining 60% is locked behind a psychological barrier that your brain constructed to keep you safe and comfortable. Every time you push past that barrier by 5%, by 10%, by even one more repetition, you teach your brain that its safety threshold was wrong, and the next time it sets that threshold a little higher. You do not need to run ultramarathons to apply this. The principle works at every scale. When your alarm goes off and you feel exhaustion pulling you back into bed, that is the 40% line. Getting up moves the line. When you are in the middle of a workout and your body tells you to stop, that is the 40% line. One more set moves the line. When you are working on a project and your brain starts generating excuses to check your phone, that is the 40% line. Staying locked in moves the line. Each of these moments is tiny. None of them feels significant in isolation, but compounded over weeks and months, they rebuild the architecture of how your brain processes effort and discomfort. The mind is the second domain, and it is where most people lose the discipline game before they even start playing. Your internal monologue, the voice that narrates your experience all day long, is either your most powerful ally or your most destructive enemy. Most people have never taken conscious control of that voice. It runs on autopilot, repeating patterns it learned in childhood, reinforcing beliefs that were installed by parents, teachers, media, and social groups that may have had no interest in your growth. The disciplined mind is not a mind that never experiences doubt, laziness, or resistance. It is a mind that has trained itself to observe those experiences without obeying them. Musashi captured this perfectly when he wrote that in strategy, Your spiritual bearing should not be any different from normal, that both in fighting and in everyday life you should be determined, though calm. The key word is calm. Discipline is not aggression toward yourself. It is not screaming at yourself to get up, work harder, push through. That approach works for about 3 days before it burns itself out. Real discipline is the quiet, clear observation that resistance has appeared, followed by the equally quiet decision to act according to your standards anyway. Here is a technique that applies this principle directly. Every time you notice your mind generating an excuse, a rationalization for not doing what you said you would do, pause and label it. Say to yourself, silently or out loud, that is resistance talking. You do not fight the resistance. You do not argue with it. You simply name it. Recognize that it is a pattern and not a command, and then return your attention to the task. This works because naming an emotion or impulse activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function and conscious decision-making, while simultaneously reducing activity in the amygdala, the part responsible for emotional reactions. A study by Matthew Lieberman and colleagues at UCLA, published in Psychological Science in 2007, demonstrated that the simple act of labeling an emotion reduced its intensity and gave the participant greater control over their response. You are not suppressing anything. You are putting yourself back in the position of the observer rather than the puppet. The third domain is your daily systems, and this is where the ancient concept of enkrateia meets modern strategic thinking through Kaizen, the Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement that Musashi would have recognized. A system is not a goal. A goal is something you want to achieve. A system is the process that makes the achievement automatic. James Clear articulated this distinction with precision in Atomic Habits. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. The person who says, "I want to read more books," has a goal. The person who puts a book on their pillow every morning so it is the first thing they see at night has a system. The person who says, "I want to get in shape," has a goal. The person who lays out their workout clothes before bed and drives to the gym before their conscious mind has a chance to generate objections, has a system. B.J. Fogg's research on tiny habits at Stanford confirms this principle. Making behaviors smaller and easier to start creates more sustainable change than relying on motivation. Musashi built his entire life around systems. His daily routine was not a suggestion to himself. It was a structure he never deviated from. He trained with 2 swords simultaneously because he believed that training the weaker hand would strengthen the discipline of the whole body. He rejected luxury, material possession, and physical comfort not through a single dramatic renunciation, but through a daily system of austerity that removed the option of weakness from his environment. The same principle applies to your modern life. If you want to stop checking your phone during focused work, remove the phone from the room. Do not rely on willpower to resist the notification. Remove the temptation from your environment entirely and let your system carry the load that willpower was never designed to bear. Here are 4 specific frameworks you can implement starting today, each one designed to build a different layer of the discipline architecture. The first framework is the identity declaration. Write down in 1 sentence who you are becoming, not what you want to achieve, but who you are. Make it present tense. I am the kind of person who trains every single day. I am the kind of person who finishes what he starts. I am the kind of person who does not negotiate with comfort. Read this sentence every morning before you check your phone, and read it again every night before you sleep. Within 3 weeks, you will notice your brain starting to flag behaviors that contradict the statement. That flag is cognitive dissonance working in your favor, and it is the most powerful motivational force available to a human being. The second framework is environmental architecture. Audit your physical space and identify every friction point between you and your discipline goals. Then, redesign the environment to eliminate them. If you want to eat better, remove the food you should not be eating from your kitchen entirely. Not to the back shelf, but out of the house. If you want to train in the morning, sleep in your workout clothes. If you want to read instead of scrolling at night, charge your phone in a different room. Each of these changes costs you 5 minutes of setup and saves you thousands of micro decisions that would have drained your focus and attention over time. This approach applies delayed gratification research, like Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow experiment, by removing the temptation entirely rather than testing willpower. The third framework is the 2-minute expansion. When resistance appears and you do not want to do the thing you committed to, tell yourself you will do it for 2 minutes only. Start the workout, open the document, begin the practice session. 2 minutes, that is all. What happens almost every time is that the hardest part of any disciplined action is the transition from rest to motion. And once you are in motion, momentum takes over. The resistance dissolves and 2 minutes become 20, 30, 60. You do not need to trick yourself into doing this forever. You only need to trick yourself past the starting line, and the starting line is where 90% of failures actually happen. The fourth framework is the evening review. Before you sleep, spend 90 seconds reviewing your day. Ask yourself 2 questions. Where did I act in alignment with my identity today? And where did I give in to comfort? Do not judge yourself harshly. Do not spiral into guilt or self-criticism. Simply observe the way a general would review a battle, noting what worked and what needs to be adjusted for tomorrow. This practice creates a feedback loop between your intentions and your actions, and over time, it closes the gap between who you are and who you declared yourself to be. There is a psychological concept that ties these 3 domains together, and understanding it will save you years of wasted effort. Researchers call it implementation intentions, and the data behind it is staggering. In 2006, psychologist Peter Gollwitzer published a meta-analysis in Advances in Experimental Social Psychology, reviewing 94 studies, and found that people who used implementation intentions, which are specific if-then plans for behavior, were significantly more likely to follow through on their goals than people who relied on motivation alone. The format is simple. Instead of saying, "I will exercise more," you say, "If it is 6 in the morning on a weekday, then I will put on my shoes and walk to the gym." Instead of saying, "I will eat better," you say, "If I open the refrigerator after 9 at night, then I will drink a glass of water and close it." The power of this technique is that it removes the decision from the moment of temptation. The decision has already been made, stored in your memory as a pre-committed response, and when the situation arises, your brain executes the plan without requiring the willpower to deliberate. You have essentially automated the discipline response, which is exactly what Musashi did with his daily routines and what Cato did with his lifestyle of voluntary austerity. They made the disciplined choice the default by designing their lives so the undisciplined choice required more effort than the disciplined one. The final element that connects everything together is something that none of the fear-based channels will tell you, because it contradicts their entire business model. Discipline that comes from self-punishment does not last. Discipline that comes from self-hatred burns bright for a week and then collapses into resentment and exhaustion. The only discipline that sustains itself across months and years and decades is discipline that comes from genuine self-respect. Cato did not deny himself luxury because he hated pleasure. He did it because he respected himself too much to let comfort define his limits. Musashi did not train 16 hours a day because he feared losing. He trained because he loved the craft so deeply that anything less than total dedication would have been an insult to his own potential. Goggins did not run ultramarathons because he was punishing himself for his past. He did it because he refused to accept that the broken version of himself from years ago was the final version. This is the foundation that makes everything else work. When you choose discipline out of self-respect, the experience is entirely different from choosing it out of fear or guilt. The actions might look identical from the outside, someone getting up early, eating clean, training hard, staying focused, but the internal experience is calm, centered, and sustainable rather than frantic, desperate, and fragile. A person who disciplines themselves out of self-love does not crack under pressure because the pressure is not fighting against their nature. It is aligned with it. You now have the architecture. You have the identity framework that makes discipline automatic rather than exhausting. You have the understanding of how your environment was designed to weaken you and the tools to redesign it in your favor. You have the 3 domains: body, mind, and systems, and the 4 practical frameworks to strengthen all 3 simultaneously. And you have the philosophical foundation that separates the people who maintain discipline for a lifetime from the people who burn out in a month. The knowledge that real power does not come from punishing yourself into compliance, but from respecting yourself too deeply to accept anything less than your best. Musashi's final precept in the Dokkodo reads, "Do not fear death." He did not write that because he was fearless. He wrote it because a man who has built his identity through daily discipline, who has aligned his actions with his standards in every small moment, has nothing left to fear. He has already become the person he was meant to be. That is what discipline actually gives you. Not a better body, not a more productive schedule, not a more impressive resume. It gives you yourself, the version of you that was always there, buried under the comfortable lies you agreed to believe. The architecture exists. The only question left is whether you will build it.